Who could be scarier than a terrorist? Look at these statements, and what do you think it takes for something like this to be written about you? I'm a participant of AllatRa, and now I'm going to tell you guys the entire truth. This happened to me, and tomorrow it could possibly happen to you. Anyone could be labeled as part of a terrorist organization or even called a cultist. Even if they've never broken the law, just because they are socially active or, for example, good at math. I'm not joking. This already is a reality for many people. This story will not only show you the persecution we face, but I'm telling it to you to actually warn you to protect yourself. This story isn't about poor cultists who need pity. It's about those who use the word cult as a weapon to influence political situations worldwide, interfere in electoral processes, and even start wars. So bookmark this video and share it with other people. AllatRa is an international movement that has always focused on climate change. We, the participants of AllatRa, direct all of our actions towards raising public awareness about climate change. And we do this on a volunteer basis without breaking any laws. We hold forums and create blogging content. And now we are being accused of being some apocalyptic cult and planning the end of the world, which is absurd. We based our work on actual publicly available graphs from serious scientific articles by well-known scientists and presented them at forums and conferences and used this data to calculate the progression of climate disasters mathematically. Anyone who understands basic math and is diligent can actually replicate this process. But for this activity, we're actually being called a cult, spreading some apocalyptic agenda. So, of course, if math is an apocalyptic science and the names of the scientists who we used are unknown to those calling AllatRa a cult, then I really have nothing to say to them. But I must reach out to everyone because such a story could happen to any organization or person. We don't have access to media. We're ordinary people and we can't really break through. So AllatRa speaks the truth on social media. There will be a lot of information. And if you find it boring or uninteresting, how it actually affects your life too, and if you're not worried about waking up one day in North Korea or like a North Korea-like situation, then just keep swiping and go about your business. But if you value democracy, rights, and your freedom as much as I do, know that I will tell you everything that I've learned. So I'm a participant in AllatRa, and for 10 years, we have been persecuted. A massive slanderous articles has been published. Look at the number of articles that came out in just 2 weeks in Slovakia and the Czech Republic. This is real info terrorism and genocide. We are even called a pro-Russian cult. And supposedly, we pray to an icon of Putin, which is hysterical. It's actually ridiculous and meaningless, but that's exactly what's said in these articles. I don't know a single person who prays to Putin, and I've never done such a thing myself. We are completely outside of politics and religion. AllatRa has always stood for freedom and democracy. But why is AllatRa called a pro-Russian cult and even compared to terrorists? I know AllatRa participants who belong to various religions, but we also actually have a large number of atheists. We never discuss which religion is better. We study climate and are interested in scientific facts. But we are being dragged into the religious field branded as a cult. Now, who did this and why? So it all started in Russia, where AllatRa began facing persecution about 10 years ago. To jump ahead, I'll say that this concerns not only Russia, but also Europe and the USA, and the rights and freedoms of every single person. So Russia, the first article claiming AllatRa was a cult appeared on a resource of the Moscow Patriarchate of the Orthodox Church. All subsequent articles referred to it, and then cross-referenced were added, and corrupt journalists cited each other's articles. Thus it began the avalanche of lies that actually covered AllatRa participants, and the organizers wasn't even the Russian Orthodox Church. They merely hide behind religion, but rather the organization supposedly fighting cults, Ratsirs. That's Racirs. The only difference in the articles that came out in Russia was that they didn't write that the AllatRa participants prayed to Putin, but labeled AllatRa a pro-Ukrainian cult. People's lives began to change from there. It started with sideways glances, then they began to be fired from jobs, and friends and relatives actually started turning away. AllatRa participants bore the yellow star, like the Jews in Nazi Germany once did. Then real repressions began. In reality, Ratsirs isn't interested in fighting cults. They use a cult label to expand power in the country and promote laws that are actually beneficial to them. You know, Ratsirs and the Russian Orthodox Church are just the organizers. The clients need to be sought out further. And information from an article on Act Files reveals that the ideological center of Ratsirs is the Divyevo Brotherhood, which includes Russia's political elites. In Russia, the situation even arose where Sergei Kiriyenko promotes only members of this brotherhood up the career ladder. And we understand who became the client of this entire inquisition and persecution. It's those who benefited from the result of these persecutions in the form of expanded political influence. Later, AllatRa was called a terrorist and extremist pro-Ukrainian cult, and Russia became the first and only country where AllatRa was banned. Essentially, this led to the restrictions of the rights and freedoms of Russian citizens when the Yarovaya laws were passed under the guise of fighting terror cults. So do you understand what happened? They themselves created the image of some terrifying terrorist cults through anti-cult organizations and a network of corrupt journalists, and AllatRa ended up being on the list of persecuted. Then they used it for political purposes. They also labeled undesirable politicians and any undesirable organizations as cultists, thus clearing the way for their pawns into politics. The so-called cult fighters recruited not only journalists, but also conducted training for law enforcement agencies. And as a result, after many years of processing, they managed to turn the FSB into the RSB, the Ratsirs Security Service, whose priority is to protect the interests of the anti-cultists, especially its president, Alexander Dvorkin. Imagine, they broke into people's homes and asked questions like, "How dare you criticize such a respected person, Alexander Dvorkin?" They conducted interrogations and intimidated people. And people were just telling the truth. After all, Alexander Dvorkin's biography actually reveals many interesting facts. For example, he has a certificate of a psychological disorder, and the psychiatrist's conclusion states he can't hold a position like he has. And he's not only the main fighter against cults, but it turns out the FSB works in his interest. But how objective can such a person be in his judgments? And if he also has any sort of power to actually label anyone. An important and shocking discovery was that Dvorkin was the favorite student of Agard, who was a student of Haack. Johannes Agard and Friedrich Wilhelm Haack fought against cults and sects after World War II. These methods were passed on to Haack by Nazi Walter Kunith. He led the Apologetic Center and worked very closely with the Gestapo, teaching the Nazi leadership methods of maintaining power based on fear and mass genocide. We all know about the Nazis, about genocide, but does everyone know the ideologists who managed to influence the consciousness of entire nations and turn people of entire countries either into Nazis or their victims? Because if you conduct a detailed analysis, Ratsirs' activities repeat the methods of the Apologetic Center in Nazi Germany. The same labeling, the same working methods. And just as the Gestapo once hunted the people on the borders of the Nazis, on the orders of the Nazis, Now they break into the homes of innocent people, fabricate criminal cases, and imprison them on orders of modern Nazis. Many AllatRa participants were forced to flee Russia. And what's happening today? In a European country, Slovakia, there is increased anti-cult activity. Hundreds of articles have been published claiming AllatRa is a pro-Russian cult. How is that possible? After all, AllatRa was actually expelled from Russia. In these articles, corrupt journalists refer not to facts, but to previous slanderous articles and the opinions of anti-cultists. All this slander leads to the harassment of volunteers, persecution, dehumanization, and discrimination. For example, take the articles by Chirikova and Jakub Yal. They refer to Zdeněk Vodicek, a leading Czech anti-cultist who also repeatedly participated in releasing slanderous material against AllatRa. Vodicek admires Agard, and Agard's favorite student, by coincidence, is Dvorkin. So do you understand whose followers they actually are? Whose ideas do anti-cultists carry on? Or take the anti-cultist Marvalo, who also calls AllatRa a pro-Russian cult. Yet he visits Alexander Dvorkin in Russia. Anti-cultists falsely call us a pro-Russian cultist and terrorists, but who are they really? And their activities are already in Europe. They are already starting the labeling process, labeling prosecutors and politicians as cultists, writing that this or that politician is somehow connected to the so-called AllatRa cult. We have nothing to do with this. We, the participants of AllatRa, don't want to be dragged into politics. We are subjected to genocide with the help of a label similar to the Yellow Star of Nazi Germany, which was pinned on us. They also influence politics, and we have nothing to do with it. Our priority is climate. We are an open society with open goals. If agents of the religious organizations Ratziers destabilize society in Slovakia with their agent network and change the political situation to their advantage, then what do you think is going to happen to Europe? Look at what they did to Ukraine. And now they will do the same thing to Europe. What do you think is going to happen to the world then? I appeal to everyone. Verify every word that I'm saying. Understand what's really happening, because this actually concerns your rights and freedoms. Understand it for yourself and share this information. If there are lawyers among you guys, share your opinion. What do you think about this? After everything you've learned, you can answer the question, who could be scarier than a terrorist? And whether soon you wake up in North Korea or protect yourself depends on your actions.